The phone slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the kitchen tile. 34 years of marriage, and David couldn't even tell me to my face that he was leaving. His voice on the answering machine echoed in our empty house. "I'm sorry, Carol. I can't do this anymore. Melissa and I, we're flying to Cancun tonight. I'll have my lawyer contact you next week." Melissa, his 27-year-old assistant, the one he'd insisted was just good at her job when I questioned why she called our home at odd hours. I stood frozen, staring at the anniversary dinner I'd spent all day preparing. The prime rib he loved, roasted potatoes with rosemary, and the chocolate souffle that was just starting to sink in on itself. The candles had burned halfway down. I don't know how long I stood there before the anger hit me. Not the hot, explosive kind that makes you throw things. This was cold and clear, like ice water flooding my veins. For the first time in decades, my mind wasn't clouded by the need to make David happy, to keep our marriage working, to ignore the signs I'd been seeing for years. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I walked to our home office and sat down at the computer. Our joint accounts were still open in the browser. David had never been good with passwords or technology. That had always been my department, managing our online life while he managed the important things like investments and property. I stared at the screen, showing our account balances. The retirement fund we'd built together over decades of careful saving. The vacation account for the cruise we'd planned for our 35th anniversary next year. The savings account with enough to finally renovate the kitchen I'd been cooking in since the 1980s. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I'd never done anything like what I was considering. I'd been the good wife, the supportive partner, the woman who stood by her man through the lean early years of his business, who raised our children while he built his career, who hosted dinner parties for his clients and ironed his shirts just the way he liked them. The woman he was discarding for someone who hadn't even been born when we got married. I took a deep breath and began transferring funds. Not everything. I wasn't a thief, just my fair share. Half of each account moved into new accounts under only my name. I'd been putting money into these accounts for 34 years. I deserved half. By midnight, I had secured my financial future as best I could, but I wasn't finished. The next morning, I called Janet, my closest friend and the wife of David's business partner, Richard. He did what? Janet's voice rose to a pitch I'd never heard from her before. "That absolute bastard. Are you okay? I'm coming over." An hour later, Janet sat across from me at the kitchen table, the anniversary dinner still sitting where I'd left it. I hadn't been able to bring myself to clear it away, as if doing so would erase the last shred of the life I thought I had. "Did you know?" I asked her quietly. "About Melissa?" Janet looked down at her coffee. I suspected something. Richard mentioned David had been staying late at the office a lot. She was always finding reasons to be alone with him. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I should have said something, Carol. I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault," I said. "I saw the signs too. I just chose to ignore them." "So what are you going to do now?" Janet asked. "I've secured some money," I said, "but I need more information. David and Richard's company. How much of it is actually David's? Because I helped build that business too, Janet. All those dinner parties with clients, all those weekends I spent alone with the kids while he networked. That's my investment too." Janet's eyes widened. "You're right. And from what Richard has told me, David's name is on everything. But you're right that he couldn't have done it without you." She paused. "Richard has been worried about some of David's business decisions lately. He's been taking risks, spending company money on things that don't make sense. Like trips to Cancun." I asked dryly. "Among other things, Richard found receipts for jewelry, expensive jewelry, company credit card." The ice in my veins hardened. "Janet, I think I need to talk to Richard. Directly. He'll tell you whatever you want to know," Janet said firmly. He's furious with David over a business deal that went south last month. Something about David making promises to clients without consulting Richard first. By the end of the day, I had an appointment to meet with Richard at his home office that evening. I spent the afternoon going through our home. In the master bedroom, I opened David's closet and ran my hands over his tailored suits. I'd helped him pick out most of them. On the top shelf was a shoebox I'd never seen before. Inside were hotel receipts dating back 2 years, a small jewelry box containing diamond earrings that had certainly never been given to me, and photographs. My stomach turned as I flipped through them. David and Melissa at a beach, at a restaurant, in a hotel room. I closed the box and put it aside. Evidence. That evening, Richard welcomed me into his study with an awkward hug. "Carol, I'm so sorry about all this. I've been trying to call David all day, but he's not answering." "He's in Cancun," I said flatly, "with Melissa." Richard winced. "I was afraid of that. Listen, Carol, there are some things you should know about the business, about what David's been doing." For the next 2 hours, Richard laid out the details of how David had been systematically moving company funds around, using the business credit cards for personal expenses, and making risky investments without proper consultation. He showed me spreadsheets, emails, bank statements. "We're structured as equal partners," Richard explained, "but lately he's been acting like he owns the whole thing. The problem is, a lot of these expenses are potentially fraudulent if the IRS ever took a close look." "And what does this mean for me?" I asked. Richard looked uncomfortable. "As his wife, you could potentially be liable for some of this if it ever came to legal action. Unless we're not married anymore," I finished for him. "Right, but there's something else. As an equal partner, he's entitled to half the company, and in a divorce, I'd be entitled to half of his half," I said slowly. Richard nodded. 25% of the company. "But Carol, there's another option. If you had evidence of his financial misconduct, you could potentially negotiate for more, much more." I thought about the shoebox in my car, about the financial transfers I'd already made, about 34 years of building a life with someone who could discard me with a voicemail. "I think I have what I need," I said. "But I'm going to need your help, Richard." "Whatever you need," he said firmly. "David's put the whole company at risk. And what he's done to you, it's unforgivable." When I left Richard's house, I had copies of all the financial records and a plan forming in my mind. My next stop was the office of Patricia Morgan, the most formidable divorce attorney in the city. Patricia's reputation was legendary. She specialized in representing women who had been betrayed by wealthy husbands, and she took no prisoners. Her office walls were decorated with thank you notes from clients who had walked away with everything they deserved and then some. Despite the late hour, Patricia agreed to see me as a favor to Janet, who had used her services years ago against a previous husband. "So," Patricia said after I'd laid out the basics of my situation, "he left you for his assistant. He's embezzling from his company, and he thought you'd just roll over and take it." "That about sums it up," I said. Patricia smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "Mrs. Anderson, by the time I'm done, your husband is going to regret ever meeting that assistant. Now, tell me everything, and don't leave out a single detail." For the next 3 hours, I poured out 34 years of marriage. The early struggles, the birth of our children, the growth of the business, and yes, the signs I'd ignored, the late nights at the office, the sudden interest in his appearance, the new cologne I was allergic to, but he kept wearing anyway. Patricia took meticulous notes. When I showed her the contents of the shoebox and explained what Richard had told me, her eyes gleamed. "With this evidence of financial misconduct and the proof of his affair, we're in an extremely strong position," she said. "But to maximize our leverage, we need to move quickly before he has a chance to cover his tracks or hide assets." "What do you suggest?" I asked. "First, we file for divorce immediately, citing adultery and financial misconduct. Second, We request an emergency hearing for temporary support and exclusive use of the marital home. Third, we demand a forensic accountant examine all of the business records. And fourth, she paused, looking at me carefully. We make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man David Anderson really is. Everyone, I asked. His family, your children, your friends, his colleagues, his clients. Patricia leaned forward. Mrs. Anderson, your husband has built his business on his reputation. His reputation as a family man, as someone trustworthy. That reputation is an asset, and it's one we can damage severely if we need to. I thought about our children, now grown with families of their own, about our friends who had celebrated every anniversary with us, about the clients who came to our home for dinner and brought gifts for our grandchildren. I don't want to hurt innocent people, I said slowly. Of course not, Patricia agreed. But David is counting on your silence, on your embarrassment, on your desire to keep up appearances. That gives him power. She was right. David had always been concerned with how things looked, with what people thought of him. It was why he dressed so well, drove expensive cars, belonged to the right clubs. What exactly did you have in mind? I asked. Patricia's plan was simple but devastating. We would file for divorce publicly, with all the sordid details included in the filing, which would become public record. We would request that the court freeze all marital assets, pending a full accounting. And we would make sure that key people, his business associates, clients, and our social circle, were aware of what was happening. The beauty of this approach, Patricia explained, is that we're not spreading rumors or making unfounded accusations. We're simply allowing the truth to come to light through proper legal channels. By the time I left Patricia's office, it was nearly midnight. I had a retainer agreement, a plan of action, and for the first time since hearing David's voicemail, a sense of purpose. I drove home to our house, my house now, I decided, and finally cleared away the anniversary dinner. As I scraped the carefully prepared food into the garbage, I felt a strange sense of closure. That life was over, but mine wasn't. The next morning, I called our children. First, Sarah, our oldest, a surgeon living in Boston, with her husband and 2 children. Mom, are you sure? Sarah asked after I explained the situation. Dad just left? For his assistant. I'm sure, honey, I said. I have the evidence. Pictures. Hotel receipts. Sarah was quiet for a moment. That son of a bitch, she finally said. I'm coming home. I'll get emergency leave. You don't have to do that, I said. Yes, I do, she insisted. You were there for every single moment of my life, Mom. Every skinned knee, every broken heart, every graduation and achievement. I'm going to be there for you now. Next, I called James, our son who had followed his father into business, though he'd started his own company rather than joining David's. His reaction was even more explosive than his sister's. I'm going to kill him, James said flatly. You'll do no such thing, I told him sharply. I don't need you in jail. What I need is your support. You have it. Completely, James said. What can I do? Just be here, I said, and maybe help me understand some of the business documents I've gotten from Richard. There are things I need to know about how all this works. I'll book a flight for tomorrow, James promised. With my children rallied to my side, I spent the rest of the day with Patricia's team, signing paperwork, providing documentation, and preparing for war. 3 days after David's voicemail, the divorce filing hit the county clerk's office. Patricia had been thorough. The filing detailed David's affair with specific dates and evidence. It outlined his financial misconduct with supporting documentation provided by Richard. It requested an emergency hearing on temporary support and exclusive use of the marital home, and it demanded a complete accounting of all marital assets, including David's share of the business. The same day, Patricia sent letters to David's lawyer, once he got around to retaining one, to the company's board of directors, and to the IRS regarding our tax returns for the past 5 years, which I now had reason to believe contained falsified information. I changed the locks on the house. I closed our joint credit cards. I changed the passwords on all our shared accounts. And I waited. The call came as I was having dinner with Sarah and James, who had both arrived that afternoon. An unfamiliar Cancun number flashed on my phone screen. I put it on speaker. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" David's voice was shaking with rage. "Hello, David," I said calmly. "I'm having dinner with our children. Would you like to speak to them?" "Carol, have you lost your mind? Richard just called me about some insane divorce filing. The company board is asking questions. My email is flooded with messages." "Not insane, Dad," Sarah cut in. "Pretty well documented, actually." "Sarah." David sounded shocked. "What are you doing there?" "Supporting Mom," she said coldly. "Something you clearly know nothing about." "This is ridiculous," David spluttered. "Carol, you need to withdraw that filing immediately. You have no idea the damage you're causing." "Actually, I have a pretty good idea," I said. "About half the damage you've caused me, I'd estimate." "Is James there too?" David demanded. "Right here, Dad," James said, his voice hard. "Just got done looking through the company financials Uncle Richard provided. Got to say, I'm really impressed with your creative accounting. The IRS should find it fascinating too." There was silence on the other end of the line, then the sound of a door closing. When David spoke again, his voice was lower. "Carol, be reasonable. We can work this out privately. There's no need to air our dirty laundry like this. You forfeited reasonable and private when you left on our anniversary for a woman half my age," I said. "Now you're dealing with me on my terms." "And what exactly are your terms?" he asked, a note of defeat creeping into his voice. "Patricia Morgan is handling that," I said. "You should have your lawyer contact her once you return from your little vacation, assuming you still have the money to pay a lawyer." "Patricia Morgan? You hired Patricia Morgan?" Now David sounded truly alarmed. "Patricia's reputation preceded her. She sends her regards," I said pleasantly. "Oh, and David, don't bother coming back to the house. I've changed the locks, and don't try to use the credit cards. I've closed them all." "You can't do that. That's my house too. Those are my cards." "Actually, according to Patricia, I can do exactly that until the emergency hearing. Something about established precedent in cases of abandonment and financial misconduct. But I'm sure your lawyer can explain it all to you when you get one." I ended the call as David was still protesting. Sarah and James stared at me with identical expressions of amazement. "Mom," Sarah said slowly, "I have never been more impressed with anyone in my entire life." James nodded, a smile spreading across his face. That was actually kind of awesome." For the first time since hearing David's voicemail, I laughed. It felt good. It felt like the beginning of something rather than the end. The next morning, I woke to find several text messages from mutual friends, all expressing shock over the news and offering support. Janet called to tell me that the company board had called an emergency meeting, and Patricia emailed to let me know that the emergency hearing had been scheduled for the day after David was due to return from Cancun. "We've got him cornered," Patricia wrote. "His lawyer called this morning, trying to negotiate. I told him we'll see them in court." I spent the day with my children, looking through old photo albums, reminiscing about family vacations and holidays. We ordered pizza and watched movies, and for brief stretches, I was able to forget that my life had imploded. But as Sarah and James prepared to go to their hotel for the night, I'd insisted they not stay in the house. I needed some time alone. I found myself thinking about the decades I'd invested in my marriage, the love I'd given freely, the sacrifices I'd made willingly, and for the first time since that night in the kitchen, I cried. Not for the loss of David, that pain would come later, I knew, but for the loss of who I thought I was, the devoted wife, the successful marriage, the life I'd believed in. Morning light filtered through the bedroom curtains, waking me from a fitful sleep. For a moment, Just a brief moment. I forgot what had happened. I reached across the bed for David, finding only cold sheets where his body should have been. Then reality crashed back in. The voicemail, the affair, the divorce filing, my new life. I got up and made coffee, looking out at the garden I'd tended for decades. The roses needed pruning. The bird feeder needed filling. Normal tasks for an abnormal time. My phone rang. "Patricia." "Good morning, Carol," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "Are you ready for today?" Today, the emergency hearing. David had returned from Cancun 2 days ago, accompanied by his newly retained divorce attorney, a man known for representing wealthy businessmen in ugly divorces. They had immediately filed a motion to dismiss my emergency petition, claiming I had overreacted to a temporary marital disagreement. "As ready as I'll ever be," I told her. "Perfect. Remember what we discussed. Dignified but firm. No emotional outbursts, no matter what they say. Let me do the talking unless the judge addresses you directly." "I understand," I said. "What time should I arrive?" "I'll pick you up at 10. The hearing is at 11, but I want us there early." After hanging up, I went to my closet to choose my outfit. My hand passed over the bright colors and patterns David had always encouraged me to wear. "You look so much younger in color, Carol," he would say, as if being younger was the highest compliment he could pay me. Instead, I selected a navy blue suit I'd purchased for Sarah's medical school graduation. Conservative, professional, dignified. I paired it with simple pearl earrings that had been my mother's and low heels that wouldn't hurt my feet if we were at the courthouse all day. I was applying my makeup when the doorbell rang. Looking at my watch, I realized it was too early for Patricia. I went downstairs and checked through the peephole. Melissa, my husband's mistress, was standing on my porch, shifting nervously from foot to foot. She wore a fitted dress that highlighted her slim figure, and her long blonde hair was pulled back in a professional-looking ponytail. She couldn't have looked more different from me if she'd tried. For a moment, I considered not answering, but curiosity won out. I opened the door just wide enough to see her clearly, but not wide enough to invite her in. "Mrs. Anderson," she said, her voice higher than I'd expected. I thought we should talk." "I can't imagine what we have to talk about, Melissa," I said coolly. "And I'm actually on my way to court, so this isn't a good time." "Please," she said, and I was surprised to see tears in her eyes. "It's important." Against my better judgment, I opened the door wider and stepped back. "You have 5 minutes." She walked past me into the foyer, her eyes darting around, taking in the family photos on the walls, the comfortable, lived-in feel of a long-term home. "I want to apologize," she said, turning to face me. "Apologize," I repeated flatly. "Yes, She seemed to be searching for words. I didn't know. Didn't know what? That he was married? Because the wedding ring might have been a clue, as were the 30 years of family photos in his office. "No, I knew he was married," she admitted. "But he told me you two had an arrangement, that you stayed together for appearances, but that you both saw other people." I laughed. I couldn't help it. An arrangement? David, and I never had an arrangement. Unless you count the arrangement where I devoted my entire adult life to supporting him, raising his children, and building his business. Melissa's face crumpled. "That's what I was afraid of. He's been lying to me, too." She opened her purse and pulled out a folded document. "I found this in his briefcase yesterday. It's what made me come here." I took the paper cautiously. It was a bank statement for an account I'd never seen before, in David and Melissa's names. An offshore account in the Cayman Islands with a balance of just over $3 million. "He opened it 6 months ago," Melissa said quietly. "That money, I think it's from the company. He's been moving it little by little." I stared at her, trying to process this new information. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because he's not who I thought he was either," she said simply. "When we were in Cancun, he got the call about your divorce filing. He was different after that. Angry. controlling. He started talking about how we might need to leave the country for a while, how we needed to be strategic about when and how we access this money. I folded the bank statement carefully. And that scared you? She nodded. I thought I was in love with a successful, honest businessman who was trapped in a loveless marriage. Now I'm not sure what's real anymore. I should have hated this young woman. Part of me still did. But another part of me recognized something familiar in her expression. The same shock and disillusionment I'd been feeling since hearing David's voicemail. Thank you for bringing this to me, I said. I'll make sure my attorney sees it. Melissa nodded. There's one more thing. She hesitated. He's planning to claim that the business has been struggling, that his shares aren't worth what you think they are. And are they struggling? She shook her head. No, they just landed 3 major new clients. The business is doing better than ever. He's going to try to hide that from you and from the court. I walked to the door, my mind racing with this new information. Melissa, I said as I opened it, why are you really doing this? She looked at me directly for the first time. Because when I saw how easy it was for him to lie to his wife of 34 years, I realized how easily he would lie to me too. Maybe already has. She paused. And because no woman deserves to be discarded like that. Not you. Not me. Not anyone. After she left, I immediately called Patricia and told her about the visit and the document. This is gold, Patricia said. Absolute gold. It proves he's hiding assets and that he's been planning this for months. I'm picking you up in 30 minutes. We need to get this to the judge immediately. The courthouse was an imposing stone building in the center of downtown. As Patricia and I walked up the steps, I saw David for the first time since our anniversary night. He was standing with his attorney, a sleek man in an expensive suit who looked like he charged by the breath. David had lost weight. His face was tanned from his Cancun trip, but there were new lines around his eyes. When he saw me, he straightened his tie nervously. For years, that gesture had endeared him to me, the powerful businessman who still got nervous about his appearance. Now it just seemed pathetic. Patricia guided me past them without acknowledging either man, her hand firmly on my elbow. Remember, she murmured, dignified but firm. In the courtroom, we took our seats at one table while David and his attorney sat at another. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, entered and called the court to order. For the next 2 hours, I listened as the attorneys presented their arguments. David's lawyer characterized me as a vindictive woman who had overreacted to a marital indiscretion by attempting to destroy my husband's reputation and business. He claimed that David was fully prepared to provide generous support, but that my actions had been designed to cause maximum damage rather than reach an equitable solution. When it was Patricia's turn, she was methodical and devastating. She presented evidence of David's affair, complete with the hotel receipts and photographs I had found. She outlined his financial misconduct with documentation provided by Richard. And finally, she produced the offshore account statement Melissa had given me, explaining how he had obtained it. Your Honor, Patricia concluded, this is not a case of a wife overreacting to a marital indiscretion. This is a calculated attempt by Mr. Anderson to abandon his wife of 34 years while hiding substantial marital assets. We are asking for temporary exclusive use of the marital home, temporary support consistent with the standard of living established during the marriage, and a full forensic accounting of all marital assets, including Mr. Anderson's business interests. The judge removed her glasses and looked directly at David. Mr. Anderson, I have to say that in my 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a blatant attempt to defraud both a spouse and the court. The evidence of hidden assets is particularly troubling. David's attorney tried to interject, but the judge waved him silent. I am granting Mrs. Anderson's petition in full, she continued. She will have exclusive use of the marital home pending final resolution. Mr. Anderson will continue to pay all household expenses and provide Mrs. Anderson with support of $12,000 per month, consistent with the family's established standard of living. And I am ordering a complete forensic accounting of all marital assets, including the offshore account that Mr. Anderson failed to disclose. She put her glasses back on. Furthermore, I am freezing all financial accounts held by Mr. Anderson, individually or jointly with any third party, pending completion of the forensic accounting. Mr. Anderson may petition the court for reasonable living expenses during this period. David's face had gone pale. His attorney was scribbling furiously on a legal pad. We will reconvene in 30 days to review the forensic accountant's findings, the judge said, banging her gavel. Court is adjourned. As we stood to leave, I caught David's eye. He looked stunned, as if he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old connection between us, the shared history that couldn't be erased by betrayal. Then I remembered the careful planning behind his actions, the secret account opened months ago, the lies told to both Melissa and me. I turned away and followed Patricia out of the courtroom. Outside, Patricia was jubilant. That could not have gone better, she said. The judge is known for being fair but tough. The fact that she came down so hard on David speaks volumes about how she viewed his conduct. What happens now? I asked. Now we wait for the forensic accountant's report. But in the meantime, you're secure in the house with support, and David is effectively on an allowance from the court. She smiled. Not a bad day's work. In the days that followed, word of the court hearing spread through our social circle. I received calls from friends expressing support, though some admitted they'd known about David's affair and hadn't said anything. Those conversations were harder, but ultimately healing. I understood their reluctance to get involved, even as I wished someone had told me sooner. Richard called to inform me that the company board had placed David on administrative leave pending investigation of his financial activities. The board is considering whether to buy out his share of the company, Richard explained. Given the circumstances, they're concerned about having him remain as a partner. And how would that affect me? I asked. Any buyout would be considered a marital asset, Richard explained. You'd be entitled to your share of it. And Carol, they're talking about a very substantial figure. The company has grown a lot in the past few years. A week after the hearing, I was working in the garden when a familiar car pulled into the driveway. David's silver Mercedes, the one he'd bought himself for his 50th birthday. He sat in the car for a long moment before getting out, as if gathering his courage. I straightened up, brushing dirt from my gardening gloves. I'd known this confrontation would come eventually. I was surprised it had taken this long. "Hello, David," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He looked terrible. His designer clothes hung loosely on his frame, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "The board is forcing me out," he said without preamble. I heard. "Did you also hear they're offering pennies on the dollar for my share of the company? A company I built from nothing." "We built," I corrected him. "And no, I hadn't heard the specifics." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache despite everything. "Carol, this has gone far enough. We need to talk about a settlement." "I have nothing to say to you outside of our attorneys," I replied. "Please," he said, and there was real desperation in his voice. "Everything is falling apart. Melissa left. The board is forcing me out. The court has frozen all my accounts. I'm staying in a hotel that costs more than my daily allowance from the judge. I can't even afford to keep my car." He gestured at the Mercedes. "That sounds difficult," I said neutrally. "Difficult? It's a nightmare. And for what? Because I made a mistake." "A mistake," I repeated. "Is that what you call secretly moving money offshore? Planning to leave your wife of 34 years and running off with your assistant half your age? I know it looks bad." "It looks exactly like what it is, David. A betrayal, not just of me, but of everything we built together." He took a step toward me, his expression softening into one I recognized from countless arguments over the years. The look that said he was about to charm his way out of trouble. Carol, we had a good run. 34 years. 2 beautiful children. But people grow apart. You have to admit, things haven't been the same between us for years. And whose fault is that? While I was busy keeping our home, supporting your career, raising our children, and hosting your clients, you were busy screwing your assistant. He winced at the crude language, so unlike my usual speech. That's not fair. No, it's not. None of this is fair, but it's reality. He tried a different approach. Think about the children, about our grandchildren. Do you really want to drag the family through a public divorce? To destroy the business that will be James's inheritance someday? Don't you dare use our children as leverage, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Sarah and James know exactly what's happening. They're the ones who helped me understand the business documents Richard provided. They're the ones who sat with me when you called from Cancun. David's face changed, hardening into something unfamiliar. So that's how it is. You've turned everyone against me. My business partner, my children, even Melissa. No, David, you did that all on your own. I will fight this, he warned. I'll appeal the judge's ruling. I'll challenge the forensic accountant's findings. I'll make this so expensive for you that whatever you get won't be worth it. You're welcome to try, I said calmly, but the facts aren't on your side. The offshore account, the business misconduct, the affair. You've left quite a paper trail for someone who always prided himself on being so smart. He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. I never thought you'd be this vindictive. And I never thought you'd be this foolish. I guess we've both been surprised. After he left, I sat in the garden for a long time, thinking about the man I had just confronted. He was so different from the David I'd married, the ambitious young man with dreams of building something important. Or maybe he wasn't different at all. Maybe I was just finally seeing him clearly. The forensic accountant's report was even more damning than we'd anticipated. Not only had David been moving company funds to the offshore account, but he'd also been falsifying business records to hide the true value of his share of the company. The report estimated that his actual stake was worth nearly twice what he'd been claiming. At the follow-up hearing, the judge's expression was thunderous as she reviewed the findings. Mr. Anderson, she said, looking over her glasses at David, the court takes a very dim view of financial misconduct of this nature. I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. David's attorney immediately requested a recess to confer with his client. When court reconvened an hour later, the attorney announced that Mr. Anderson was prepared to offer a settlement. The terms were better than I could have hoped for. I would receive the house, both cars, including David's precious Mercedes, all household contents, and 70% of the value of David's share in the business once the buyout was complete. In addition, I would receive substantial alimony for a period of 15 years. In exchange, I would agree not to pursue criminal charges related to the financial misconduct. Patricia leaned close to me. This is an extremely generous offer, she whispered. Far more than we might get if we went to trial, even with the evidence we have. I recommend you accept. I looked across the courtroom at David, who couldn't meet my eyes. He looked defeated, diminished. The powerful man who had dominated our marriage for 3 decades was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. I accept the terms, I told the judge. Outside the courthouse, Patricia shook my hand. Congratulations, Carol. You've secured your future on your own terms. Thank you for everything, I said. What will you do now? She asked. It was a question I'd been asking myself for weeks. What does a woman do after 34 years as someone's wife, when that identity is suddenly stripped away? I'm not sure yet, I admitted. Travel, maybe. I've always wanted to see Europe. David was always too busy with work for a proper vacation. Patricia smiled. Well, you certainly have the resources for it now. That evening, I sat in what was now officially my house, in what was now officially my garden, with a glass of what was now officially my wine. Sarah called to congratulate me on the settlement. James texted that he'd heard from one of his business contacts that David was leaving town, headed for a fresh start somewhere on the West Coast. I found I didn't much care where David went. The anger that had fueled me through the past weeks was fading, leaving behind something quieter but more enduring. Pride in my own resilience, appreciation for the friends and family who had stood by me, and a growing excitement about the possibilities that lay ahead. The next morning, I woke early and made a pot of coffee. I took my cup out to the garden and watched the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. A new day, a new beginning. I pulled out my phone and began searching for flights to Paris. It was time to start living on my terms, not as David Anderson's wife, but as Carol Anderson, a woman with her own story to tell. As I scrolled through flight options, I smiled to myself. He had left me for his younger assistant, thinking I would simply fade away into quiet desperation. Instead, I had taken the house, the cars, and yes, his reputation. But more importantly, I had taken back myself. And that was worth more than all the rest combined.